You've spent your entire life believing that communication is the key to success, that expressing yourself, explaining your position, and making yourself understood will earn you respect. You were lied to, and the cost of that lie has been your authority, your presence, and your power. I'm going to expose something most people never realize until it's too late. The most powerful move in any interaction isn't what you say, it's what you refuse to explain. This is about the strategic use of silence, the psychology of withholding, and why the people who talk the most often control the least. If you're the type of person who over-explains, who feels compelled to justify your decisions, who can't stand the discomfort of someone not understanding you, this is going to challenge everything you believe about communication and power. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the most influential people in history spoke less than everyone else in the room. Let me start with a question that's going to make you uncomfortable. How many times today did you explain yourself to someone who had no authority over you? Think about it. That text message where you justified why you couldn't make it. That conversation where you defended a decision that was already made. That moment when someone questioned your choice and you immediately launched into reasons, examples, and proof. Every single time you did that, you handed away power you didn't even know you had. Machiavelli understood something about human nature that most people never grasp. Explanation is submission. When you feel compelled to justify yourself, you're unconsciously accepting that the other person has the right to judge you. You're placing yourself beneath their authority. Think about the most powerful people you've encountered, whether in business, politics, or even your personal life. How often do they explain themselves? How frequently do they justify their decisions to people questioning them? They don't. And it's not because they're arrogant. It's because they understand that the moment you start explaining, you've already lost the frame. Here's what actually happens when you over-explain. First, you signal uncertainty. People don't explain decisions they're confident about. They state them. When you launch into a detailed justification, what people hear isn't your reasoning, it's your doubt. Second, you invite negotiation. Every explanation opens a door for someone to argue with your logic, poke holes in your reasoning, or suggest alternatives. You've transformed a closed decision into an open debate. Third, you train people that your decisions are provisional, that if they push hard enough, if they question persistently enough, you'll reconsider. You've taught them that your no isn't final, it's just the opening position in a negotiation. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who commanded the greatest army in the ancient world, wrote something that most people misunderstand. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. But here's what he meant that nobody talks about. Controlling your mind means controlling your need to be understood. The strongest mind is the one that can tolerate being misunderstood without flinching. Let me paint you a scenario you'll recognize. Someone questions your decision. Maybe it's at work, maybe it's personal. Your immediate instinct is to explain, to make them understand, to get them on your side. So you start talking, you give context, you provide background, you explain your reasoning. And as you're talking, something subtle happens. Their body language shifts. They're not listening to understand anymore. They're listening to counter-argue. Why? Because you've signaled that your decision is up for debate, that it requires their approval, that their understanding matters more than your conviction. Now imagine a different scenario. Someone questions your decision, and you simply say, "I've made my choice." Nothing more. No justification. No defense. No explanation. What happens? Discomfort. Theirs, not yours. Because you've refused to play the game they expected. You've held your ground without giving them anything to push against. And here's what they'll never admit. In that moment, their respect for you increases. Not because they agree with you, they might still think you're wrong, but because you demonstrated something rare, self-certainty. Sun Tzu said, to know your enemy, you must become your enemy. But there's a deeper level to that wisdom. To maintain power over others, you must first maintain power over your need for their validation. Every time you explain yourself unnecessarily, you're revealing that you need something from them. Their approval, their understanding, their agreement. And the moment someone knows you need something from them, they have leverage over you. This is the explanation trap. The more you explain, the less they respect your authority. The more you justify, the more they question. The more you seek understanding, the less powerful you become. And the cruel irony? The people who explain themselves the most are usually the ones making the best decisions. They're thoughtful, conscientious, reasonable. But in a world that respects strength over correctness, their reasonableness becomes a liability. Think about the last argument you lost, not because you were wrong, but because you cared more about winning than they did. You brought logic, evidence, reasoning. They brought indifference to your need to be right, and indifference always wins. Here's the harsh truth nobody wants to hear. People don't respect what they fully understand. Mystery creates reverence. Clarity without context creates authority. When you explain everything, you remove the psychological distance that makes leadership possible. This isn't about being mysterious for the sake of it. This isn't about playing games or manipulating people. This is about understanding that power exists in the space between you and others, and explanation collapses that space. Before we go further, pause and ask yourself, when was the last time you made a decision and didn't feel the need to justify it to anyone? When was the last time someone questioned you and you were comfortable not answering? If you can't remember, that's not because you're a good communicator. It's because you've been conditioned to believe that silence is weakness and explanation is strength. The opposite is true. Let me tell you about a psychological phenomenon that most people never consciously recognize, but experience constantly: the power vacuum. Human beings are deeply uncomfortable with uncertainty. When there's a gap in information, our brains automatically try to fill it. When someone doesn't explain themselves, we create narratives to make sense of their behavior. And here's the critical part. The narratives we create are almost always more favorable than the truth would have been. When someone explains themselves thoroughly, they define the limits of their power. When someone stays silent, people project power onto them based on their own insecurities and assumptions. Machiavelli observed this in the courts of Renaissance Italy. He noticed that the rulers who commanded the most respect weren't necessarily the most competent. They were the ones who revealed the least about their decision-making process. He wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." But most people miss the tactical application of this wisdom. What you appear to be is shaped not by what you say, but by what you refuse to say. Think about job interviews. The candidate who talks the most rarely gets the job. The one who answers questions with precision, leaves strategic gaps, and demonstrates comfort with silence, that person projects competence. Why? Because excessive talking signals anxiety. Silence signals control. The same principle applies everywhere. In negotiations, the person who speaks first after a proposal usually loses. In conflicts, the person who escalates with words first usually regrets it. In relationships, the person who constantly seeks reassurance usually drives the other person away. Silence isn't passive, it's active withholding. It's a deliberate choice to let others sit in their discomfort rather than rushing to relieve it. Let me give you a framework that will change how you interact with people. The information diet. Most people operate on an information buffet. They share everything freely, explain every decision, broadcast every thought. They believe transparency equals trust and communication equals connection. But powerful people operate on an information diet. They're strategic about what they reveal and when. Not because they're secretive, but because they understand that information is currency, and currency loses value when it's freely distributed. Here's how it works in practice. When someone asks you why you made a decision, your default response shouldn't be an explanation. It should be a question. Why do you ask? This single phrase reclaims the frame. It forces them to justify their inquiry before you justify your decision. When someone challenges your authority, your default response shouldn't be defense. It should be acknowledgement without engagement. I understand you disagree. No explanation of why you're right. No attempt to change their mind. Just acknowledgement that creates space for their disagreement without validating it. When someone tries to make you feel guilty for a boundary you've set, your default response shouldn't be justification. It should be repetition. As I said, this is my decision. No new information, no softening, just calm repetition that signals the topic is closed. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." But bravery isn't just about action, it's about inaction. It's about having the courage not to fill every silence, not to defend every choice, not to seek validation from people who have no authority to grant it. Here's what happens when you implement strategic silence. First, people start projecting competence onto you. When you don't over-explain, they assume you don't need to, that your decisions are so obviously correct that justification would be redundant. Second, people stop testing your boundaries. When you don't engage with every challenge, challenges decrease. People learn that questioning you doesn't yield the emotional response they're seeking, so they stop. Third, your words carry more weight. When you speak less, people listen more carefully to what you do say. Scarcity creates value in attention, in communication, in presence. But here's the part that makes most people uncomfortable. This requires you to tolerate other people's negative emotions without trying to fix them. When someone is frustrated that you won't explain yourself, you have to be okay with their frustration. When someone thinks you're being difficult because you won't justify your decision, you have to be okay with that perception. When someone accuses you of being closed off because you won't share everything, you have to be okay with that accusation. Most people can't do this. Their need to be understood, liked and approved of is stronger than their need to maintain authority. So they break. They explain. They justify. They apologize for having boundaries. And every time they do, they train people that persistence works. That discomfort is temporary. That silence can be outlasted. Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But the most powerful reaction is often no visible reaction at all. Think about this. Why do poker players wear sunglasses? Not to hide their eyes. Cameras can see through that. They wear them to control what information they give their opponents. Every micro-expression, every blink, every glance is information that can be used against them. Your words are the same. Every explanation is a tell. Every justification reveals which criticisms you're sensitive to. Every defense shows where you feel most vulnerable. Strategic silence is wearing sunglasses in every interaction. It's controlling the information flow so that people can't use your openness against you. Now let me address what you're thinking. But isn't this manipulative? Isn't this dishonest? No. Here's why. Manipulation is about deceiving people to get them to do something against their interests. Strategic silence is about protecting your decision-making authority from people who have no right to it. There's a massive difference between lying and simply not volunteering information, between deceiving and choosing not to justify yourself to people who aren't owed an explanation. The question isn't whether strategic silence is ethical. The question is, why have you been conditioned to believe that you owe everyone access to your thought process? Who taught you that declining to explain yourself is rude? Who told you that maintaining boundaries around your decision-making is wrong? Who convinced you that being understood is more important than being respected? Those beliefs serve someone's interests, but they're not yours. Here's something most people never consciously recognize. Every interaction is an energy transaction. One person expends energy, the other receives it. And the person expending energy is almost always in the weaker position. When you over-explain, you're spending energy trying to get inside someone else's head, trying to make them see things your way, trying to eliminate their resistance. You're working harder than they are. And in any transaction, the person working harder has less leverage. Think about sales. The desperate salesperson who talks non-stop, who addresses every possible objection, who can't tolerate silence. They rarely close deals. Why? Because their energy expenditure signals desperation, and desperation repels commitment. The successful salesperson presents the offer, then shuts up. They let the prospect sit in the discomfort of the decision. They're comfortable with silence because they understand something crucial. Silence is a test, and whoever breaks first loses. This principle extends to every area of life. In leadership, the manager who constantly explains and justifies decisions exhausts themselves trying to get everyone on board. The one who states decisions and moves forward conserves energy and commands respect. In relationships, the partner who constantly seeks reassurance, who needs to process every feeling, who can't tolerate any ambiguity, they drain the relationship's energy reserves. The one who maintains some mystery, who doesn't need constant validation, who can sit with uncertainty, they remain attractive. In conflicts, the person who keeps explaining, defending, and justifying is burning through emotional fuel. The person who stays calm, responds briefly, and doesn't escalate conserves energy and maintains the high ground. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You always own the option of having no opinion. There is never any need to get worked up or to trouble your soul about things you can't control. These things are not asking to be judged by you. Leave them alone." But most people can't leave things alone. Someone misunderstands them and they have to correct it. Someone has a wrong impression and they have to fix it. Someone questions their decision and they have to justify it. All of that is energy expenditure. All of that is power drainage. All of that is voluntary submission to other people's frames. Here's what happens when you stop expending energy on people who aren't investing energy in understanding you. First, you reclaim massive amounts of mental and emotional bandwidth. The constant background noise of "do they understand me? What do they think? Should I explain more?" quiets down. Second, you become more present in your actual priorities. Instead of managing everyone's perception of you, you focus on the work, the relationships, and the goals that actually matter. Third, you develop what I call energy authority. People instinctively recognize that you're not going to burn yourself out trying to convince them of anything. They either get on board or they don't, but you're not changing course either way. Let me give you a practical example. Someone at work questions your project approach in a meeting. The old you would have launched into a detailed explanation of your methodology, your research, your reasoning. You'd have tried to bring them around to eliminate their objection. The new you says, "I've considered multiple approaches. This is the one I'm proceeding with." Then you move on to the next agenda item. What's the difference? In the first scenario, you've opened a debate. You've signaled that your approach is negotiable, that their approval matters, that you need consensus. You've spent energy trying to convince them. In the second scenario, you've stated your decision and moved forward. They can agree or disagree. Their opinion has been noted but doesn't change the outcome. You've conserved energy and maintained authority. Will some people be frustrated by this? Absolutely. Will some people think you're being difficult? Certainly. Will some people accuse you of not being a team player? Probably. And here's the critical question. Does their frustration change whether your decision was correct? No. Their feelings about your decision-making process are separate from the quality of your decisions. You're confusing people-pleasing with leadership. You're mistaking consensus-building with strength. Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." But that's often misunderstood as advocating cruelty. What he actually meant was this: respect derived from fear of consequences is more stable than respect derived from affection, because affection is fickle and consequences are consistent. When you conserve your energy, when you don't expend effort trying to make everyone happy with your decisions, you become consistent. People know where they stand with you. Your boundaries don't shift based on who's pushing them. That consistency is what creates real respect, not because people fear you, but because they know you're unmovable. You're not going to exhaust yourself trying to justify yourself to them, which means you're not going to burn out, which means you're reliable in a way that people-pleasers never are. Here's the part that's going to sting. Every time you over-explain, you're not being considerate. You're being weak. You're prioritizing someone else's comfort over your own authority. You're spending energy you should be conserving for things that actually matter. Think about the relationships in your life where you feel most exhausted. I guarantee they're the relationships where you're doing the most explaining, the most justifying, the most emotional labor to make the other person understand you. Now think about the relationships where you feel most energized. They're probably the ones where mutual understanding exists without constant articulation, where both people are comfortable with some ambiguity, where explanation isn't required for respect to exist. The difference isn't the people, It's the energy economy you've established. In the exhausting relationships, you've trained people that they can extract explanations from you. In the energizing relationships, you've established that your decisions stand on their own. Sun Tzu said, "Victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win." Translation: the battle is decided before the first move is made, in the positioning and preparation. In communication, this means the power dynamic is established before words are spoken, in how much you need the other person to understand you versus how comfortable you are being misunderstood. If you need them to understand you, you've already lost. If you're comfortable being misunderstood, you can't be manipulated through that need. This is the energy economy of power. Conserve your efforts for things that actually move your life forward, not for managing everyone's perception of you. Everything I've said so far is useless unless you know how to actually implement it. Theory without application is just intellectual entertainment. So let me give you the practical framework for strategic silence. Rule 1. The 24-hour silence. When someone asks you to explain a decision, institute a 24-hour buffer before responding. Not because you need time to think, because you need time to determine whether the question deserves an answer. Most questions about your decisions come from one of three places: genuine curiosity from someone who's earned your transparency, challenge from someone testing your authority, or manipulation from someone trying to change your mind. The 24-hour buffer lets you identify which type of question you're dealing with. Genuine curiosity will wait patiently. Authority challenges will escalate with impatience. Manipulation will try to guilt you into responding immediately. Once you've identified the type, you respond accordingly. Genuine curiosity might get a brief answer. Authority challenges get a boundary. I'm not going to explain my decision, but I'm happy to discuss implementation. Manipulation gets silence, or I've already answered this. Rule 2. The one-sentence maximum. Any explanation you do give should fit in one sentence. Not because you're being curt, but because any explanation beyond one sentence is defense, not communication. I've decided to pursue a different approach. That's communication. I've decided to pursue a different approach because I analyzed the data and found that the previous method wasn't yielding results, and I consulted with 3 experts who agreed, and I ran some trials that confirmed my hypothesis. That's defense. Communication states facts, defense justifies them, and justification signals that your decision is vulnerable to challenge. Rule 3. The reverse question. When someone asks, "Why did you do that?" or "Why did you decide this?" don't answer, redirect. Why do you ask? What's your concern? What would you like to see happen? These questions accomplish 3 things. They shift the burden of explanation to them. They reveal their true motivation, and they give you time to decide whether their question deserves engagement. Most people will realize in that moment that they don't actually have a good reason for questioning you. They were just reflexively challenging authority. The ones who do have genuine concerns will articulate them clearly, and then you can decide whether to address them. Rule 4. The broken record. If someone persists in demanding an explanation after you've declined to give one, use repetition. "I understand you want more information. I've made my decision. I hear that you disagree. The decision stands. I know this isn't the answer you want. This is the answer you're getting." Don't vary your phrasing. Don't add new information. Don't soften your tone to make them feel better. Just calmly repeat the same message until they understand that persistence will not wear you down. This is incredibly uncomfortable at first. Your brain will scream at you to fill the silence, to elaborate, to make them understand. Resist. That discomfort is your conditioning fighting against your authority. Let the discomfort exist in the space between you and them, but don't take ownership of it.